Rain rode the wind like needles when the cart jolted to a halt at the servants' gate of Wessex Manor. Emma Linwood climbed down, toes numb, fingers red and chapped from the journey. She kept one hand on the small bundle that held all she owned, a change of linen, a wooden comb, a thin shawl, a little Bible. The other hand closed over the shape of a locket against her throat. It was plain brass and older than her mother's recollection, and inside it lay a pressed sprig of a bitter herb her grandmother had called a stubborn friend. She felt it as one feels the warmth of a hidden ember. It steadied her. The gate creaked open. A lantern lifted. Mrs. Agatha Pierce stood there in her stout shoes and dark gown, grey hair tucked firm under a cap. Her voice was brisk and kind, and no sound was wasted. "You are late," she said. "But no matter. The roads are dreadful. Come in, child, before you drown where you stand." The kitchen swallowed her in heat. Steam rose from a pot of parsnips. Bread crusts lay like fallen bark along the table. A scullery boy scrambled to his feet when Mrs. Pierce looked at him as if the tilt of her chin had moved him like a string. Emma's wet noise and mud had no business in that brightness, yet people made space, as they do for trouble and for newcomers. Emma Linwood, Mrs. Pierce announced, for the cook and the undermaids and the butcher's boy who had carried a side of beef into the pantry. From Dorset, good references. Light on her feet, steady hands. She will mind the still room, the linens, and any quiet service assigned. See that she has a pallet in the attic. We are out of time for chatter. Emma bobbed a small curtsy. "Thank you, ma'am." Mrs. Pierce's eyes, sharp and not unkind, moved once over Emma's face. "What you must know is this," she said. "Wessex Manor is a house of habit. We wake and sleep by the same bells every day. We polish what does not need polishing because movement keeps grief from making root. To the world, the prince is not dead. He is asleep. 10 years of sleep. You will speak little. You will carry your fear like a covered dish. The physician is Dr. Hawthorne. He is order itself. His word is law. You will not so much as breathe near the air without leave. Do you understand me, Emma Linwood?" "Yes, ma'am," Emma said, and felt the old woman's words settle on her like a great cloak. She was shown the back stairs and the slope of that corridor where candles burned in guarded cups, each one's flame shaped by draughts from the sea. The house's spine was of stone. Its heart beat slow and cold. Emma could sense the rooms by their smell: beeswax in the parlour, old roses in the Queen's corridor, damp wool where the footman dragged in coats and boots from the rain. She kept her bundle tight to her chest and watched her steps. Mrs. Pierce stopped at a narrow door marked by a sprig of dried rosemary tied with a bit of blue thread. "The still room," she said, and lifted the latch. The air inside was different. It was clean and close with leaves. Shelves lined the walls with jars labelled in a careful hand: mint, motherwort, elderflower, lemon balm, rue, feverfew, copper stills, linen straining cloths, a mortar and pestle with the smooth, bright look of use. Emma breathed and felt something in her ribcage loosen. There was a window, though the light was stingy and wintry. Rain streaks crossed the glass like veins. "You will prepare the poultices and teas as directed," said Mrs. Pierce. "No invention, no experiments. Dr. Hawthorne keeps a list. You will also account for every ounce. The Queen will not abide waste." "Yes, ma'am," Emma said again, softer, and touched the smooth stone of the pestle as she would have touched a friend's shoulder. Mrs. Pierce noticed the locket. "That is a country piece," she said. "My grandmother's," Emma said. "She kept leaves in it, one in particular when someone was very poorly. For remembrance," she said, "and for stubbornness." The older woman's mouth tilted, something halfway between a smile and a memory. "Keep it tucked," she said. "Some in this house find fear where others find comfort. We are making for the chapel now. The Queen attends. You will see how things are." Emma followed down a corridor that made her think of bones. Candles guttered and straightened as the wind pressed and eased. Through small windows, she saw the sea's grey back and the white lash of its foam at the cliff base. The chapel door stood open. Inside, the hush had a weight to it. A priest murmured. The candles were more in number here, and more carefully tended. The Dowager Queen Eleanor knelt at the front in mourning black that had softened with years. She was handsome still in a fine-boned, distant way. At her side was a chair of carved oak, Upon it lay a prayer book and a pair of gloves. Her posture was a rod. She did not turn when they entered. She did not need to. "The prince," Emma whispered, before she could stop herself. "Hush," Mrs. Pearce said, but the word held gentleness. They did not go into the royal corridor. That would have been a trespass. Instead, Mrs. Pearce brought Emma to a threshold where the floorboards began to take on that hush that wraps a long sickness. Emerald silk faded to brown on a chair. Footsteps softened. Even the wind seemed to kneel there. "He lies here," Mrs. Pearce said, and the words were simple, like a gate opening to a field one must cross. She did not mean that Emma should enter. She meant that some part of the house's truth had been set before her, and now it was hers to carry. Emma saw only the edge of the room, a bank of candles, a shelf with covered jars, a shape under linen, a hand on the coverlet, pale as parchment, a nurse dozing on a stool, her neck bent at a hard angle. Emma felt herself sway as if a small current had taken her. 10 years, she thought, 10 years of breath thin as thread. "Dr. Hawthorne," Mrs. Pearce's voice was low, a warning. "He will wish to know that you have arrived, and you will wish to know his rules, for he makes them, and the Queen holds to them." They waited in the corridor. The nurse stirred. A man appeared as if conjured by the need for neatness. He was of middling height, precise in every line, not a hair astray. His eyes went over Emma as a surveyor's line would run over a hedge, measuring, not seeing. "Ah, Mrs. Pearce, our new addition," he said. "You are the one from Dorset. Linwood." "Yes, sir," Emma said. He looked at her hands. "Steady," he said. He looked at her shoes. "Clean them." He looked at her locket. "Remove that in duty hours. Sentiment creates mess. We cannot afford either." Emma bowed her head. "Yes, sir." He gave her the list of teas, his hand a neat machine. "The Dowager takes lemon balm after prayers. The Prince receives barley water sweetened with syrup before noon. Rosehip. No tinctures, no spirits, no meddling. Those who meddle cause harm in the name of hope." He paused. "Do you know hope, Miss Linwood?" Emma felt the locket warm against her skin. "I know it, sir," she said quietly. He sniffed. "We shall see. You are to stay to the still room and linen. The Prince has all the care he requires, and he is beyond your skill." The last word was a stone he lobbed without looking where it landed. He turned away, and the air cooled in his wake. Mrs. Pearce's jaw drew tight, then eased. "There is kindness in him," she said in a very gentle tone, as one might tell a child that a thorn is part of a rose, but it is afraid of its own reflection. They set Emma to work at once. Wet linen. Lay it on the flagged stones. Lift it again, clean as a new thought. Sort the herbs. Tie bundles. Replace labels gone soft with damp. The motions settled into her bones, as if they had known her hands all along. She listened to the house, the bells, the steady tramp of footmen, the creak and shudder of shutters in the wind. In the afternoon, as rain softened to a heavy mist, Emma took a basin and cloth along the quiet passage to the chapel, to wipe the window-sills where salt gathered white in the cracks. The Queen's voice floated back to her in a breath of prayer. There were other voices too. A young one, smooth with a bright edge, a lady's voice unused to being denied. "You must not keep this up, Beatrice," said the Queen's measured tone. "It does not become you." "I only say what others think, Your Majesty," said Lady Beatrice. 10 years of candles, 10 years of a physician who has not mended what he claims to tend, 10 years of a council that treads water. We must accept what is." "We accept duty," the Queen said. "Not despair." Emma made herself smaller, as small as a breath, and wiped the sill in small, firm strokes. She did not look up when Lady Beatrice passed. She felt the cool of that presence, like the shadow of a swan. Beatrice's perfume was pale and costly, a whisper of violets too early for the season. The young woman's gaze flicked over Emma and caught on the chain at her neck. "You. Do you attend here often?" the lady asked. Not unkindly, not kindly either. As one might ask a window if it planned to fog again. "I attend where I am told, my lady," Emma said. The eyes narrowed, but not in anger. In curiosity. Beatrice's fingers, neat and white, rested on Emma's cloth for a moment, leaving not a speck of dust. Then she moved on, shoes quiet as secrets. Evening narrowed the halls. Lamps were lit, then trimmed. The flame turned down to a little orange bead. The wind fell. The house breathed again. Emma carried warmed bricks up to the attic for someone's feet. She took blankets down to the nurse, who had not moved from her stool. She stood a moment at the threshold to the prince's room, not entering, feeling the air. The air of a sick room is its own weather. It is a season that does not turn. Emma heard the muted ticking of a clock. She heard the tiny sound of a breath. It was there, it was thin as paper, but it had weight enough to move her. The nurse's eyes opened. "Who are you?" she whispered, not wanting to set the air to shivering. "Emma, ma'am." From the still room, the nurse's face softened. "A good still room is near to God," she said. "Go on then." Emma set the blankets down, and on some thought she did not question, she drew one over the nurse's knees. The nurse lowered her gaze, not to weep, but to not have to keep her voice steady while she thanked the girl. Emma slipped away again, her heart like a hare, quick and watchful. In the still room, she found Mrs. Pierce washing the last of the spoons. The old woman's sleeves were rolled, the tendons in her wrists were like harp-strings. "You will do," Mrs. Pierce said without looking up. "You have hands like a clock. They move, and you trust them." Emma did not trust much in the world, but she trusted how water ran toward the lowest place, and how a leaf would twist its face to the light, and her grandmother's voice, which was quiet, even in memory. "One drop, child," the old woman had said once, pressing the sprig into the locket with a finger knotted by years. "One drop when hope goes dim, not before, not for laziness, when all other hands have tried and failed, and the breath is the length of a candle's last curl. One drop to call the body to its door and ask it not to leave yet." Emma had never had to test those words. She worked and listened and mended. She tucked the locket away and left it there. It was not a trinket. It was a promise that chose its own hour. The hour came near midnight. Mrs. Pierce had gone to rest on a bench with her feet tucked into the hem of her skirt. The house had folded itself down. Only the sea kept its voice up. A draught under the still-room door licked at Emma's ankles. She could not sleep. That breath in that room had gotten into her and would not let her close her eyes. She wrapped a shawl tight, set her palm flat on the wooden table, and felt the vibration of rain on the roof come through the old wood. She meant to fetch a candle snuffer and see to the corridor lights. She meant to pass the prince's door without pausing. She meant to be as invisible as a good maid is, a ghost that leaves warmth and order behind it without troubling the air. Instead, her feet brought her to the threshold again. The candle bank had guttered itself down to a landscape of craters and small, stubborn flames. The nurse dozed. The hand on the coverlet had not moved. Emma stood there while the house held its breath, and she remembered the field behind her mother's cottage when the storm had stripped the barley, and then the sun had come out and warmed the ground, and the very smell of it had been a promise. She did not count herself brave. Brave was for battlefields and men in boots. She counted herself careful. She did not know which of those two she was being now. She knew only that a breath was becoming a question. She went back to the still room. She opened a drawer and took out her bundle. She set the little Bible on the table. She took up the locket, and with the care of one reading a letter addressed to their future self, she opened it. The pressed sprig rasped faintly against the hinge. She touched the edge of the leaf. It had the smell of something that grows in stony ground and keeps its bitterness like a shield. She set the locket down. Her hands did not tremble. They were not allowed to. She reached for a small glass bottle with a cork that fit like a vow. The liquid inside was amber, not bright, not dull, something of a candle in it and something of resin. Her grandmother's recipe was in her head, not ink. There was honey, and there was a whisper of angelica, and a breath of feverfew, and the patient work of slow heat and winter patience. This had been made in another house, on another night, when Emma had not thought it would ever be asked for. She wrapped the bottle in her shawl and slipped it into her pocket. She took a cloth and wet it with rainwater from the jug, left to catch drips off the sill. She held her breath until her body asked for air, and she gave it back. The corridor felt longer now. Each candle made a small island, and she walked between them like a person crossing a river in flood, stone to stone. She reached the door. She did not look to see if anyone watched. Fear would only make her clumsy, and clumsiness would be a betrayal. Emma Linwood, said a voice in her head that sounded like Mrs. Pierce, like her mother, like the nurse, and even like the Queen all at once. Do not be foolish. Emma Linwood, said another voice, which was only her own. Do not be faithless. She stepped inside, quiet as a clot of breath. The nurse's chin dipped, then lifted, then settled again. Emma moved to the bedside as if the floor had taught her how to place her feet. The face on the pillow was not young, not old. It was a face that had waited and learned patience as a trade. The lashes lay dark against the pale of his cheek. His mouth was a thin line. The breath lifted and fell with the faintest insistence. She set down the wet cloth. She put her fingers to his jaw just against the hinge, where her grandmother had taught her the gate hangs. It was not immodest. It was practical. It was the difference between a leaf caught under a stone and a leaf free to turn itself to the sun. Her heart was loud. The house was quiet. The sea was endless. Alone by the guttering flame, Emma pressed her fingers to the amber vial in her pocket and understood she could not leave him to the dark. The vial was warm from her skin. She drew it out and set it on the table beside the candles. The cork came away with a soft sigh. The scent was faint and clean, honey, a ghost of green, a memory of smoke from slow fire. She folded the cloth, slid it under his chin. She whispered not to him but to the moment, not before, not for laziness, when all other hands have tried and failed. Her fingertip touched the glass rim. One drop gathered, quivered. She steadied her hand by setting her wrist against the bed frame so the wood would share its steadiness with her. She thought of her grandmother's hands. They had been old and sure. Emma's were young and sure for this one thing. The drop fell. It slid beneath his tongue like a secret. She did not force his mouth to open. She waited for a swallow, the smallest movement. It came. A muscle at his throat moved like the flick of a fish under water. She wiped the rim, stoppered the bottle, folded the cloth again and placed it on his brow, cool from the rain. The nurse breathed deeper once and settled again. The candles let go of a last hiss and then steadied. Now, Emma said to her own heart, we wait. Waiting is work. She stood, then sat, then stood again. She cleaned a spoon that was already clean. She trimmed 2 wicks. She moved the saucer under the candle that dripped fastest. She listened to the clock mark each minute and lay it in a line like stitches. She said the Lord's Prayer twice and her grandmother's chant once. She said her own name once to remember who was responsible for what she had done. She told the air to be kind. Hours are longer at night. Each one has more bones in it. The rain ran out of itself and dragged at the roof. The wind tried the shutters and failed. Somewhere a door shook and then gave up, pretending it wanted to open. The nurse woke with a start, saw Emma and frowned. What are you doing here, girl? Emma did not lie. Watching, she said. He is very still. He has been still for 10 years, the nurse said, and her face softened as if she regretted the sharpness. Go fetch me water. The mouth goes dry, even in sleep. Emma brought water. She wiped the rim so it would be soft against the prince's lip. She held the cup while the nurse wet a linen and touched it to his mouth. The nurse nodded. Thank you. Go on now. Sleep while you can. Emma withdrew to the shadow by the hearth. She could not go. Not yet. The room's darkness had thinned a little. She could feel the shape of dawn outside, gathering itself like a thought that is shy to be spoken. She remembered a winter fever when she was 12, her mother's hand on her brow, the ceiling beam above her bed, the taste of honey and something bitter. Morning came that time. It came like a hand sliding under her back and lifting her to a different place. She sat and waited and watched the pale shape on the bed and thought nothing at all for a long time. Then the light on the window changed. It was not a color at first. It was a slow brightening. The glass let more of the world through. The candles seemed to grow smaller because they were no longer required to do so much. Emma stood. The nurse had nodded forward again. The air had the cold prickliness of morning before a fire is laid. Emma's knees felt loose. Her hands remembered the cork, the drop, the swallow. She told them to be still now. The prince's lashes moved. Emma did not breathe. She feared the sound would blow the moment away. His lids trembled again, like moth wings. A tiny line formed between his brows, not pain but effort. A person remembered. A person trying to lift a heavy door. His eyes opened. They were not the eyes of a picture. They were not perfect. They were human. They were grey with blue at the rim and dark at the center, like sea under cloud. They did not know where to rest. They tried the ceiling, then the window, then Emma. She stepped closer, not to startle him. The floor gave a small sigh under her foot. She put her hand on the bedstead where he could see it. "Good morning," she whispered, and found she was crying without a sound. "Good morning, sir." His mouth moved. It was a foolish thing, how her heart leaped at that small motion. He tried again. No sound came, only the shape of it. He blinked as if the air were too large. His throat moved and made the tiniest scrape like a new bird. She thought to fetch the nurse. She did not move. He was looking at her as if the world were too bright and she were a smaller light he could bear. "Emma," she said softly. "My name is Emma." He worked his lips around the word. It was hard work. It was lifting a stone from a well. He did not finish. The sound fell. But it was a sound and not a dream. The nurse woke and saw and made a noise that was not her own voice. She put her hand to her mouth. She stood, and the stool toppled. She put both hands on the bedrail and said, oh my dear boy." Emma stepped back so she would not be in the way. Her hands shook now, belatedly. Her stomach felt hollow, as if she had missed a meal. Joy and fear belong to the same family. They can sit at the same table without trouble. Footsteps ran in the corridor. Voices bumped into each other. The nurse called, gently, gently, His Majesty, call for Her Majesty. Oh, call for the Queen. A footman peered in and then ran like a message sent with legs. Another came and then another. Emma found herself pinned for a moment between the bed and the wall. Bodies moved around her, all wanting to be near, all wanting to be first to tell. The air filled up with the sound of being alive. The prince's eyes found the window and then the ceiling again. He swallowed. He seemed bewildered by the taste of air. The nurse wet his lips and whispered steady, nonsense words like a mother to a child. Emma stepped away. She should go. Her place would be asked for. Her hands were dirty with audacity. They might stain whatever came next. Dr. Hawthorne pushed through like a blade. His coat was buttoned. His cravat sat like a rule at his throat. His eyes saw everything they wanted to see and nothing else. "What is this noise?" he said, in a tone that meant he already knew and hated it for arriving at an inconvenient hour. He reached the bedside and stopped. The pause was lasting enough to break something in him and let something else out. Then his face smoothed, and his mouth found its line. He looked at the nurse's hands. He looked at the boy by the window. He looked at the prince and saw the open eyes. He looked at Emma. The amber vial sat on the little table where she had placed it. The candle beside it had burned itself to a stump, leaving a soft lake of wax. The nurse said, "He woke." He woke all at once. He looked about and swallowed. He tried to speak. "He is awake, doctor. He is awake." Dr. Hawthorne's gaze moved to the vial. It did not linger. It snapped back to Emma and stayed there. "What have you done?" he said, and his voice had no breath in it. Emma made herself stand steady, though her knees were water. "I was here," she said. "I called for water. I tended the candles." His eyes did not shift. He held his hand out. "The vial, Miss Linwood." She looked at his hand. It was clean and pale and as careful as a ledger. She picked up the vial and set it there. He held it as if it might stain him. He removed the cork. He raised it to his nose and did not let the scent enter more than he must. He stoppered it again. His mouth drew down. The line between his eyes cut deeper. The Queen came, her steps even, her face a mask set between fear and hope. The room bent itself around her as grass bends when a deer steps through. She went straight to her son and put her hand to his face, and her shoulders gave a small shudder, which was all the world would ever be allowed to see of her breaking. "Arthur," she said, and the name sounded as if she had not spoken it aloud for 10 years. Her eyes did not leave him. She did not appear to know there were other bodies in the room. She bent and pressed her forehead to his and breathed. Dr. Hawthorne waited for her next breath to finish before he moved closer. "Your Majesty," he said, "the first duty now is to keep everything as it should be. Nothing abrupt, no changes, no unknowns. There has been an intervention." The word made a hole in the air. It reminded Emma of an auger going into wood. The Queen did not look at him. "What do you mean, Doctor?" she said. and her voice was quiet, which was worse than loud. He held up the vial an inch. "This," he said. The nurse's mouth opened and closed. Emma felt the heat climb her neck. She could say the words. 1 drop. Honey and Angelica. She could produce the measures. She could show the steadiness of her hand. But what were her hands against his rules? The Queen turned then. Only her head and her eyes passed over Emma, as if Emma were a flame, and the Queen a person too close to heat to permit herself warmth. "Who put that to my son?" she asked. Emma would have spoken. Mrs. Pierce was not in the room. No one else would speak for her. She drew breath. Dr. Hawthorne was faster. He did not say, "I suspect." He did not say, "I fear." He said, "The maid, the new one. She has overstepped every boundary set for her. She has administered an unsanctioned concoction to the person of the heir in the dead of night. That is not courage. That is vandalism wrapped in hope." The Queen stared as if at a window that had fogged over. Then she looked at her son again. He was looking at the ceiling with the startled calm of a creature just delivered. The nurse stroked his brow. He swallowed again. The smallest sound left him. He was not dying, he was not dead, he was not gone. Emma spoke then because she could not speak. "Your Majesty, I meant no harm. It was 1 drop. I learned—" Dr. Hawthorne's hand cut the air. "Enough," he said. "We cannot permit wild remedies in the royal bedchamber. Your Majesty, I beg leave to have her removed pending a formal inquiry. The safety of the heir demands it. Protocol demands it. Decency demands it." The Queen's mouth tightened. She did not answer at once. The room had become larger, as if everyone had stepped back a little inside themselves to watch how this would fall. The nurse looked between the Queen and Emma and the doctor, as if she were watching a rope drawn 3 ways. It was the prince's voice or the shadow of it that stirred the silence. He made a sound that might have been the start of a word. The shape his lips made was familiar to Emma, because she had asked for it 1,000 ways, 1,000 times in her head. She heard it now, and it hurt like joy. He could not finish. His throat was not ready. His eyes slid toward the window again, too bright. Dr. Hawthorne did not so much as blink at the sound. He looked only at the Queen. He had found his measure, and he meant to apply it. "Arrest that girl," he snarled. "She has breached protocol and bewitched the heir." 2 footmen moved as one. Hands, careful and impersonal, closed on Emma's elbows. They were not cruel. They were firm, like doors being shut. The room fractured into whispers. The nurse cried out, "Not so rough. She is a child." The Queen lifted a hand, and every sound knelt. Not mercy, not anger, simply authority. Dr. Hawthorne did not raise his voice again. He did not need to. "Remove her," he said. "We will have order while we discern what has been done." Emma did not pull against the hands. It would have been useless. She kept her chin level and her steps neat because in a house like this, neatness is a defense. As they led her out, she heard the nurse murmur another nonsense comfort, the kind given to someone who does not yet understand the shape of their own body. She heard the Queen say Arthur again, low, private. She heard the breath of the sea press its cold face against the window and look in. The corridor had sharpened. Servants had appeared as if the walls had breathed them out. Curiosity is a stealthy animal. The underhouse knows everything long before the overhouse rules upon it. Eyes looked and slid away, and came back. A boy tripped on the runner because he was watching Emma rather than his feet. They took her to the steward's office, where the ledger books sat like bricks in a foundation. Mr. Ellis, the steward, was thin, fawn-eyed, with hair that gave the impression of having receded backward from responsibilities. He looked at Emma as a man looks at a bill that must be paid and cannot be afforded. "Close the door," he said. "Sit." "No, stand." Dr. Hawthorne placed the vial on Mr. Ellis's blotter. It looked strange there, a forest thing in a city of ink. "State your name," the doctor said. "Emma Linwood. Your origin." "Dorset, sir." "Your skill." "Still-room and linen, sir." "Your presumption," he said, and Mr. Ellis's pen scratched in the quiet. She folded her hands to hide the trembling. I acted to ease suffering, sir. 1 drop. It is a tonic learned in my grandmother's house. It is not witchcraft. It is not poison. It is measured, it is gentle. It has been used when hope is thin. Mr. Ellis rubbed his eyebrow, a small, weary gesture. Dr. Hawthorne did not sigh. He did not move enough for sighing. "The heir's person is under my sole care," he said. "Every dose, every mouthful, every strip of linen is recorded. We do not experiment on princes. You have breached protocol, decency, and your place." She had no defense that would fit the room. The truth she could offer was too large and too small. "He woke," she said, and the words felt childish against the doctor's blade. Mr. Ellis's eyes flicked up, then down. The doctor's lip tightened, not in pleasure, but in the resignation of a craftsman watching a hammer strike a pane. "The waking is an event," he said. "It does not absolve a transgression. Your Majesty must be protected from the impression that chaos births miracles. We do not owe thanks to anarchy. We owe thanks to breath," Emma said before she could stop herself. The room froze. Mr. Ellis's pen stopped dead, a tiny dot of ink spreading like a little night. The steward coughed. He was not unkind. He was only tired from standing at the precise intersection where care meets coin. "Miss Linwood," he said, "your employment is household business. Your conduct is now court business. I am instructed to remove you from any service that places you within the royal corridors. You will hand over your keys to the still room. You will remain confined to the lower floor. Pending council review, your dismissal is likely. If the council so decides, other penalties may be—" He did not say the word. He did not need to. It hung in the room with the draft. Imaginings do not need to be named to frighten. Dr. Hawthorne lifted the vial between finger and thumb, as one might lift a spider. "Mr. Ellis," he said, "record that this unlawful substance was confiscated from the person of the maid. Record, too, that she admits to administration." Emma's throat burned. She had not imagined gratitude, but she had imagined, perhaps, less contempt. "I do not wish to harm anyone," she said, and hated the quaver in it. "Harm is not measured by wishes," the doctor said. "It is measured by outcomes and by rules. Take her to the service hall. Let the household hear the charge. There will be no private corner to cultivate rumor." They led her through the passages a different way, the one that all bad moments choose, the long way, where each step adds a finger of people to the edge, like a hem being sewn by too many hands. The service hall was a big room with a low ceiling, tables, benches, hooks for lanterns. Most everyone was there, pulled by the gravity of scandal. Even the cook had left her broth to skin over and stood with her arms bare and flour on her cheek. Emma was placed on the low dais, where Mr. Ellis counted wages on Saturdays. The vial sat on the table beside his ledger. Dr. Hawthorne stood to one side, as even as a rule, the hall smelled of yeast, wet wool, and the iron tang of a storm's old teeth. Mr. Ellis cleared his throat. "It is my duty to inform the household of a breach of protocol. Miss Emma Linwood, newly hired stillroom assistant, administered a substance not prescribed by the court physician to the person of His Royal Highness in the night. The prince has awoken. The circumstances are under review. Until the council sits, Miss Linwood is relieved of duties and confined below stairs." He looked as if he wished he were telling them the price of candles had risen instead. Dr. Hawthorne stepped forward the width of a boot. "The substance may have been administered with good intention," he said. "Good intention does not sanctify trespass, and if it had gone amiss, the harm would have been unthinkable." Voices rose. A scullery maid crossed herself. The under-butler said something about sorcery under his breath. A footman frowned hard enough to make his own head ache. In the doorway, Lady Beatrice stood with the easy stillness of someone to whom the room belongs, whether the room knows it or not. She was dressed for nothing at all in particular, and managed to make that seem like a more important event than most important events. Her gaze found the locket's chain at Emma's neck and paused there. The curl at the corner of her mouth might have been a thought. It might have been a smile if one did not know smiles. The nurse pushed in and found a place at the back, breathless, eyes wet. Mrs. Pierce was not yet there. Emma saw faces, people she had met and not met. Janey, with her red hands and her soft laugh. Tom, with his 2 new boots. The house looked at her now as a single creature with many eyes. She would not cry here. She could cry later. She could cry in a place that did not echo. Mr. Ellis said, "Miss Linwood, if you have any words to say to the household, speak them now. There will be no calling out, no barbs. This is not a forum for quarrel, it is a telling. Then we go back to work." Emma's mouth was dry. Words felt like stones that would not stay in her hand. "I came to work," she said, and heard how small that sounded. "I came to carry water and clean cloth and mend and measure. The room slept and the wind was loud and I could not leave him to the dark. My grandmother taught me a tonic for breath when breath grows thin. 1 drop. I gave 1 drop. He woke. If this is wrong, I will carry the weight of it as I am told. But I will not call it malice to have reached for a candle." Silence took the room for a count of 5. Then it cracked. "Witchcraft," someone hissed. The word leapt like a flea. A guard near the door stiffened. The steward banged his palm on the table. "Enough," he said. "Names are not the business of this room." Dr. Hawthorne's gaze was not heated. It was very cold. "That," he said almost gently, "is precisely the point. Names are the business of higher rooms. Your task here is to comply. My task is to guard the air. I am no priest and I am no judge. I enforce order. Order is how people keep from drowning together when the boat lists." Someone laughed once, bitter and small. Lady Beatrice, still by the door, let her eyes move over the hall like a sieve. Her voice carried without effort. "Rules are very fine until they come to a wall, Doctor," she said. "Then we learn whether they are ladders or cages." Dr. Hawthorne inclined his head a fraction. "The council prefers cages for good reason, my lady. Ladders too often lead to roofs, and roofs lead to falls." The Dowager Queen's presence reached them before she did. Conversations break off a second sooner. Spines discover their ability to stand straight. She entered with 2 ladies and a page, and brought a different weather with her. The room bowed itself without moving. Her eye fell on Emma. It did not burn. It did something worse. It measured the weight of a life against a principle. Mr. Ellis murmured, "Your Majesty," and stepped aside. The Queen said nothing for 3 heartbeats. Then she spoke so quietly that everyone heard. "My son opened his eyes this morning. I am grateful to God. Dr. Hawthorne has served faithfully for 10 years. I am grateful to him. I do not mistake outcomes for permissions. If mercy and rule had quarreled in that room, I should have chosen rule. That is my charge. I take no joy in that answer, but I will not lie to you to make it sweeter." She looked directly at Emma then, as if she were speaking to a person rather than a problem. "You will not be whipped, Miss Linwood. You will not be dragged in chains as fools love to threaten. But you will be removed from the royal floor as the physician has demanded, and you will stand before the council at their hour to explain yourself. Until then you will do no service that brings you within the shadow of my son's door." "Thank you, Your Majesty," Emma said, because there was no other sentence that would not make things worse. The gratitude scalded her tongue. The Queen's lashes lowered. She was tired. She had been tired for 10 years. She turned to go. As she did, Lady Beatrice leaned in, a murmur shaped like silk. "Your Majesty, if I may say so, there are whispers that the still room keeps receipts the court has not sanctioned. It would be wise to have them examined. The people do not like to feel the old gods creeping back in through the scullery." The Queen's head tilted, the smallest motion. She did not look at Beatrice. She looked at Dr. Hawthorne. "See to it," she said. "Yes, Your Majesty," he answered. The room exhaled only when she had left it. Sound came back like a stream returning to its bed. People dispersed as if a flock had been startled. The cook clapped her hands once and shouted, "If any of you think bread bakes itself, you're welcome to dine on wind. Move." Emma's legs discovered they had been holding her up. They wanted to stop. She stepped down from the dais. No one reached to touch her. No one blocked her way. That was almost kindness. She walked the long corridor to the back stairs, past the places where the sea's breath finds the house, past the lines of pegs where capes hang like dark tongues, past the cupboard where the mops live without hope, up the narrow flight to the attic. Her pallet was a small Mercy arranged by Mrs. Pierce, near a window near the edge where the roof dipped and made it easy to listen to rain. Emma shut the door and leaned her head against it and let the shake come. It was a quiet shaking. It did not have the violence of panic. It had the steadiness of grief. She did not throw herself on the bed. She did not tear anything. She undid her cap, set it on the trunk, seated herself on the pallet, and folded over like a book kept too long open. The tears came, hot, hard, not loud. They did not ask permission. They did not require it. She pressed her palms to her eyes and saw colors the way one does when pressing on closed lids. Bruised purple, red like the inside of feeling. She thought of the prince's eyes opening and felt joy pierce her again, sharp as a needle pushed through cloth. She thought of Dr. Hawthorne's voice and felt anger take a seat beside sorrow. She thought of the Queen's measured kindness and almost hated her for it, which frightened her because she did not want to hate. When the shaking lessened, she pulled the locket free and opened it. The pressed herb lay there, old and perfect. It had not changed for the room's scorn. It did not know how. Her grandmother's voice returned, as calm as a hand on a brow. Courage walks quietly, child. It wears soft shoes. It does not proclaim itself a virtue. It does not ask the world for applause. It rises when called and sits when bid, but it does not leave the room when the truth is being told. Emma closed the locket and pressed it to her chest. She whispered into the hollow of the roof, not a prayer, not exactly. A promise made to herself feels like prayer when it is new. The house moved below her, its works resuming, its rooms finding their ribs again after the gasp. She could hear the footman's boots, the clink of crockery, the hiss of something that had boiled over. The attic window bubbled with rain. A soft knock came at her door. She tensed. She was ready to be taken down again, to answer again, to be told again. "Emma," said Mrs. Pierce on the other side, her voice as familiar as the sound of a ladle against a pot. "Child, if you wish to fight, I will not let you fight alone." Mrs. Pierce came in without ceremony and shut the door with her hip, already reaching to put her arms around Emma as if she had been doing so for years. The embrace was quick, firm, and ordinary, the kind that steadies without demanding thanks. "There now," she said. "Sit up. Breathe. Drink this." Emma blinked at the mug pressed into her hands. It was warm and smelled of lavender, and something with a bitter edge that did not apologize for itself. She sipped and felt her breath find its old path again. "I am to be shut below stairs," Emma said when she could. "I am to stand before a council I have never seen. They will ask me to explain a thing I cannot make respectable." Mrs. Pierce lowered herself to the pallet with the ease of a woman who has made her peace with hard benches and softer hearts. "Respectable is what people call something after it has won," she said. "Truth does not always win first. Put that in your pocket." She set a wrapped bundle on Emma's knees. It made a small thump, solid with paper and years. "What is it?" Emma asked, and kept her voice down because even walls can develop ears when gossip is hungry. "The late princess kept a still room of her own," Mrs. Pierce said. "Properly, quietly. The doctor did not forbid it then because a queen's daughter is allowed to play at steadiness if she keeps a neat book and calls it charity. When she was taken from us, her notes were boxed and left to nap. I made sure a copy found its way into my keeping. Now it finds its way into yours. If they mean to call the still room a nest for old superstitions, we will show them its bones are labelled." Emma's fingers went numb and then hot. She unwrapped the bundle. Inside lay a ledger bound in tired calf, corners blunt from hands. She could feel the shape of a woman's diligence in it before she ever turned a page. "You should know," Mrs. Pierce said, "that this is both a candle and a tinderbox. Do not wave it at fools. Read it, copy what matters, keep your own notes. When your hour comes before those who love rules because they can turn them into fences, you will have a gate of your own to point to." Emma nodded. Her hand found the locket and touched it the way one reaches for a step in the dark. "Do not place yourself between the Queen and the physician," Mrs. Pierce added. "No one wins that tug. Place yourself between the truth and the fire. Let them burn their pride, not our pages." She took a breath as if to say more, then only covered Emma's hand with her own for a moment. "There is a line walked by women that men will always call trespass. Walk it anyway, but walk it clever." They moved to the still room, the attic chill following them like a cat that doesn't quite admit it has chosen a person. Mrs. Pierce set lamps low and closed the shutters as if to make the room a pocket. Emma laid the ledger on the table. Her fingertips hesitated, then turned the first page. A careful hand had written a title and a date, receipts for the service of the household and the infirm. Beneath, neat columns, ingredients, seasons, observations. The voice of a woman who had looked with her whole attention and refused to be scorned for it. Emma ran her eye down the pages. Elderflower syrup for winter cough to be prepared when the blossoms are new, and the bees have announced the month. Mint for the bile when tempers rise. Rosemary for remembrance, but not on empty stomachs. Margin notes in that same hand, less formal, like a conversation the princess had with her future self. "Here," Mrs. Pierce said, pointing. "See how she balances feverfew with honey. Your drop contained angelica." She notes that too, for calling the blood back when it has wandered off in the cold. Emma's throat thickened. She copied the measures in her small, tidy script, using the sidebook Mrs. Pierce slid across. She noted the hours of simmering and the patience demanded. She noted where caution outweighed enthusiasm. She remembered the weight of the prince's jaw under her fingers, and the way his throat had moved like a shy creature. Another page. A warning boxed in a firm line. "Beware the sweet sleep from bitter seed. It mimics peace and steals breath by inches. It is no cure. It is a leash." Emma read it twice. "Bitter seed," she said. "My grandmother kept a sprig of a bitter companion in the locket, for stubbornness. But this speaks of a different sort of bitterness." Mrs. Pierce nodded, slow. "Some seeds are medicine when asked politely and properly. Some are sleepers. The princess had a mind like a balance. She weighed things even when heartache pressed on the pan." Emma touched the locket and then the margin with the warning. The hand had added a clerk's note below. "The plant syrup is to be kept under lock. Its scent turns sweet when boiled with almond and pear." "Sweet," Emma whispered, remembering the ghost of it on the air in the infirmary. A sweetness that covered something else. "We will not run ahead of ourselves," Mrs. Pierce said, though her eyes had sharpened. "We will gather. We will not accuse without a rope of facts. Patience is the only weapon permitted in houses like this." They read until the candle pin marked midnight again. Emma copied until her wrist ached and then copied more. Her sidebook began to look like the ledger's quiet daughter. She found receipts that were cousins to her grandmother's and others she had never seen. She saw how the princess had been exacting, recording failures as cleanly as successes. When Emma closed her eyes for a moment, words scrolled against the dark. Angelica, feverfew, rue. The ledger smelled faintly of lemon oil and thyme. When she opened her eyes again, Mrs. Pierce had drawn a shawl over her shoulders without comment. "Sleep 3 hours," Mrs. Pierce said, "then come with me to the herb garden at dawn. No one notices old women and quiet girls at dawn. We will walk where truths grow in rows and remember their names." They parted, and sleep came as quickly as if it had been waiting outside the door for permission. Before the light had claimed the sky, Emma followed Mrs. Pierce through the side yard to the garden tucked in the lee of the kitchen wall. The rain had washed the world clean and left it smelling of iron and green. The ground was dark with satisfaction. Beds lay in neat rectangles, the soil high and proud. Lattices stood like gentlemen in their shirt sleeves. The sea's breath could not quite reach here. The wall caught it and made it work to come in. Mrs. Pierce handed Emma a basket and a knife. "We harvest nothing today," she said. "We look. We introduce you properly so the plants will forgive your hands later when you take parts of them." They walked row to row. Rosemary, tough and upright, offering itself to memory. Mint, already threatening bad manners at the edges. Feverfew, a scatter of white buttons that would not take no from a calendar. Angelica, dignified, its leaves like palms held up to bless and restrain. Rue, bitter indeed, but honest about it. Mrs. Pierce spoke as if to children in a schoolyard. "This one argues if you let it. This one sulks if you forget to sing. This one pretends to be delicate, and then grows like a rumor." Emma's chest loosened as if someone had untied it. Beauty that can be named is a kind of safety. She knelt to touch the earth with her free hand. It took her fingers gladly, cool and damp, and gave them back scented with clean rot and promise. Bootsteps scuffed at the far gate. Emma straightened, basket forgotten for a moment. 2 footmen came first, their faces careful. Behind them a figure moved with the uncertainty of a foal on new legs. Arthur walked between them, each man's arm offered not as a restraint, but as a suggestion. His eyes were on the light as if it were a language he half remembered. The dawn made his face less wasted, not by filling it, but by choosing soft places to stand. They stopped when they saw Emma and Mrs. Pierce. The footmen bowed small bows, surprised to find anyone awake. The prince's gaze moved from Mrs. Pierce's cap to Emma's face. He did not seem surprised. He seemed attentive, the way a person listens for a note they know will come again. "Good morning, Your Highness," Mrs. Pierce said, calm as palms. His mouth shaped around a word that had been waiting for its turn. He looked at the sky, and then at the candle of the sun, struggling against cloud. "Light," he said. It was hoarse and careful, and it landed in Emma like a seed that had found exactly the right crack in the stone. Emma's own word came without thought. "Candle," she answered, barely breathing it. The prince's mouth twitched, which might have been an attempt at a smile or might have been his face remembering it could move. Dr. Hawthorne was not with them. The nurse had sent him to air, perhaps, or perhaps duty had allowed it. The footman on the right cleared his throat. "His Highness will walk to the chapel door and back, Mrs. Pierce," he said, as if the old woman must approve the route. "And he shall," Mrs. Pierce said. "And he shall take the smell of rosemary with him for courage, and mint for brashness, if it pleases him." Arthur's hand, which had been hovering near his middle as if holding himself in, reached out and brushed the rosemary. He held his fingers to his nose, considering the idea of courage as a scent. He nodded once, a solemn conversation with his own balance, and took 3 more steps toward the light. Emma breathed. She did not think of her own troubles for a full minute. The world had a small hinge, and it had turned without creaking. That was enough. The prince and his escorts moved on, each step a story in a different tense. Mrs. Pierce watched them with the eyes of someone who has buried a child and kept walking. When they were gone, she put her hand on Emma's sleeve. "Keep your notes," she said. "Keep your head. Keep that ledger safer than your skin. There are kinds of men who will call it a threat because it is a record kept by a woman. We will need each page whole." They returned to the still room with a sprig of rosemary that had broken and therefore could be forgiven for being taken. Emma opened the ledger and found the page where rosemary sat like a queen among the lesser plants. She copied the lines into her book for the shape of the script, as if the princess's steadiness might fall into her fingers through imitation. She turned another page. Her heart knew the pace of copying now and ran ahead of her hand. Her eye caught a notation in the margin near a listed cordial, meant for weak hearts and frightened minds. "Beware the sweet sleep from bitter seed," it said again, and below it a note to herself or to anyone who would listen. "Do not confuse the tonic with the syrup. Cousins share a face. Only one is trustworthy." Emma folded that warning into her ribcage. She thought of the sweetness she had smelled yesterday. She thought of the nurse's exhausted loyalty. She thought of the doctor's measured disdain. She thought of the Queen's voice standing like a pillar in a room built of air. She turned the page again. Her fingertip caught at the edge. It lifted too easily. The next leaf had been torn irregularly, not clean. The rip had taken a corner of the margin note with it. Ink remained where a name had begun and gone missing. Emma bent close, breath held, as if exhaling might erase what was left. B. Emma stared at the torn edge until the ink blurred. The page had given a name and then refused to finish its courage. B. And the rest gone with someone's careful theft. Mrs. Pierce's shadow moved beside her. "Do not let your mind run where your feet cannot follow," she said. "We will find the missing piece when it wishes to be found. For now we have living matters. The steward has reassigned you. Linens by the chapel. You will keep your head lowered and your ears open. Nothing is learned by sulking in an attic." Emma closed the ledger and slid it into the hollow of the flower bin under a layer of muslin. She wrapped her copybook in plain brown paper and tied it with kitchen string. She pinned her cap smoother than necessary, as if neatness could be armor. The chapel corridor had the peculiar quiet of rooms that hold more hope than they are sure they can bear. Her new duties were tame. Wash the altar cloths, warm the chairs with a brick before the Queen's prayers, sweep away the salt that crept along the floor from the sea-laden doors. It was work that asked for back and hands, not for voice. She made herself small. She made herself always in motion. She counted her breaths the way a lace-maker counts stitches. On the third morning, boots sounded on stone, careful, as if the feet inside were learning the map. The nurse's voice came first, steady with the cheerfulness of someone who had practiced it until it sounded like truth. "Left foot. Good. Now let the right catch up. Your Highness, the rail is there. No hurry. We do not chase the sun. It is patient, and so are we." Emma turned with a cloth in her hands. He was taller on his feet than he had seemed in the bed. He was thinner, too, which made his bones more honest than a court usually allows. The light from the high window fell on his face and found hollows, and made of them something like sculpture. The footman hovered behind, hands at the ready. The nurse glanced at Emma, surprised to find her there, and then included her in the circle with a nod. "Good morning, Miss Linwood," she said. "We are taking 3 steps today and not one more." "Good morning," Emma said, and set her cloth aside because it seemed impolite to keep wiping an altar cloth in the presence of a human miracle. "Your Highness." Arthur's eyes flicked to her. Recognition might be too strong a word. It was not familiarity. It was ordinary attention given without stinginess. He looked at the altar, at the window, at the place where the stone floor shone more from footsteps than from wax. The nurse guided his hand to the rail. "Say your word," she coaxed, as if the whole of the world could be remade from a single sound. He looked at the small pane where the sun laid itself in a square on the floor. His lips moved. "Light," he said, and the word was better than the first day. Less frayed at the edges. "Candle," Emma answered, because she could no more stop herself than she could stop a tide with a broom. He took another step. It was a long journey measured by inches. The nurse hummed under her breath. Emma took one slow pace backward so he would not have to walk toward a wall of stone and find it a stranger. When he tired, they sat him in the Queen's warmed chair because she was not yet there and would not mind. The footman kept a respectful distance. The nurse fetched the barley water. Emma watched the cup. It was too full. It would spill on a hand that did not yet remember how to command fingers. She stepped close and held the saucer. "May I?" she asked the nurse, because asking permission is a sheath to a blade. "If your Highness will allow it," the nurse said, still in that careful cheer. Emma took the prince's hand as one takes a sparrow. Steady, not tight. The muscles under his skin were like rope left too long in the weather. They wanted to slip. She angled the cup. He watched her mouth, not the cup, as if learning the shape of the word by example, though no word was being formed. "Sip," she said softly. Another. There. He swallowed. No spill. The nurse's gratitude was quick and private as a blink. She warmed his hands with the brick wrapped in a cloth. She did not speak for a time. Silence can be a kind of courtesy when mouths are learning their tools again. He looked beyond her at the altar. He frowned slightly, the kind of frown made by someone trying to recall where they had left a thing a long time ago. He touched the rail with careful fingers. "Name," the nurse encouraged. "Something simple." "Arthur," he said, and his voice found itself in that moment where the syllables met and refused to fall apart. It was not her place to reply to that. She did anyway, because rules had already failed them once and it had delivered them both to this day. "Yes," she said, very quietly, as if the name were a fragile cup. The Queen came then, and they all stood, and the moment retreated as a bird to a hedge. Emma lowered her eyes and stepped back, let the morning fold itself over the new reality. So it went, day upon day. 3 steps became 5. Rail to door became rail to window. He learned the stairs one at a time, like verses. He learned to balance a spoon. He learned water does not need to be fought. He learned the chapel's echo and the timbre of his own voice inside it. The nurse taught him. The footmen steadied him. Emma moved in quiet lines, and when small things made themselves hurdles, she put her hand there and let the hurdle be smaller. "Light," he would say, and she would answer candle, and sometimes the corner of his mouth would try to remember a smile. The still-room hours were given back to Mrs. Pierce, but Emma still passed its door and felt the ledger under the flower bin like a heartbeat under floorboards. She kept her copy close. She kept the torn edge of the page in her mind like a loose tooth. B could have been Beatrice, and yet the syllable could belong to a dozen other names if one wished it to. Lady Beatrice began to appear in the corridor at odd hours, forgetting things she had not left in the chapel. She smiled the way one smiles at the dawn, as if it had been arranged for her convenience. She watched the prince with eyes that had never had to ask twice for anything. One afternoon, Emma held a cup and the prince's hand, and the alignment was perfect and simple, and the water went down his throat with no rebellion. The footman murmured "well done" as if to a horse he admired. Beatrice leaned at the doorway with a pose as casual as carved marble. "What a pretty tableau," she said, amused and sweet. "Loyalty, patience, devotion. We should paint it for the long gallery. The kingdom loves its little sermons." Emma did not answer. Silk carries words faster when it is interrupted. Beatrice's gaze fell to the chain at Emma's throat. "What have we there?" she asked. "A friend's keepsake?" "My grandmother's locket, my lady," Emma said. "Family sentiment. It is not worth anyone's attention." "Everything is worth someone's attention," Beatrice said lightly. "That is the mischief of houses like this. One never can tell which trifle will become a banner." She left the doorway smelling faintly of violets. The nurse looked at Emma as if to ask if she wished for a knot cut from her thread. Emma shook her head and kept her hands still. Twice more Beatrice displaced air without purpose where Emma worked. Twice more her eyes went to the locket. Once she let her fingers brush the chain as she passed, the gesture affectionate and impersonal at once, the way one pats a cat that is not theirs. The day after that, Mr. Ellis called for Emma to bring fresh linen to the west terrace, where the prince would attempt the shallow stairs. Emma carried them and found the air brighter and thinner, flavoured with salt and gull calls. The terrace gave the sea its due. The horizon sat like an idea too large to be held all at once. He stepped out, leaned a fraction into the wind and stood still as a mast. His face changed. It did not soften. It clarified. He took the top step, then another, and did not look down. The world was wide, and something inside him accepted that without complaint. Emma carried nothing important that day. She carried the sight of it, which turned out to be more than enough. The nurse's breath came out in a laugh. The footman bit his tongue not to cheer like a boy at a race. That evening, when the bells for supper sounded, Emma returned to the attic with a weariness that was clean and earned. She thought of the ledger and decided it could sleep under flour one more night. She undressed with a lazy care, folded her clothes, nudged her shoes side by side like old friends. A draught slid under her door that did not belong to the weather. Someone had left it not quite latched. She frowned. She always shut it until it clicked, because doors that fail are like promises that fray. They let in troubles that think themselves invited. She thought of nothing at first. Perhaps Mrs. Pierce had poked her head in to leave a mended cuff. Perhaps Janey had come to ask about a stain. She set her cap on the peg, and her hand went to her throat by habit, and found only skin. The locket lay on the trunk, where she left it only to sleep. It was not where she had left it. It was turned in a different direction. The hinge faced the window, not the wall. The clasp sat a fraction open, the way a mouth does when it is about to speak and thinks better of it. Emma stepped closer. The smell of violets was thinner than a thought. It might have been memory. It might have been real. She lifted the locket. The hinge made the softest sound. Inside, where the pressed sprig should have lain complete, was a pale impression of its veins, and one gap the size of a petal. Emma stared. Her breath forgot itself. Her grandmother's stubborn friend stared back, maimed in miniature. She had not dreamed the draught. She had not imagined the shift of the hinge. She had not imagined the small absence, which seemed louder than any clamour. Emma woke to find the locket ajar, and a single pressed petal missing. The summons came on paper, the colour of old milk, with Mr. Ellis's handwriting marching across it, as if it wished to be anywhere else. By order of Her Majesty it read, "The household is to assemble in the Great Hall at 11 of the clock. Matters concerning conduct and protocol will be heard." Emma folded the note once and let it press its weight into her palm. Mrs. Pierce met her eyes and did not say, "Do not be afraid." She said, "Remember your measures, remember your patience. Truth does not raise its voice. It does not need to." The great hall was all structure and stare. Flags hung like decisions that had already been made and did not intend to be revisited. The floor had seen dances and debates, and the year when a snow fell indoors through a broken window, and no one forgot it after. Today, it was set with benches and a dais. The Dowager Queen sat at the high end, grief and discipline folded into her like two hands clasped. Dr. Hawthorne stood near her shoulder, smooth as a note placed under a plate. Lord Chancellor Whitcomb hovered near the edge of the dais, eyes attentive, mouth closed as if he had swallowed his own taste for pronouncements and found it sour. Emma took her place among the servants called forward. Nurse, 2 footmen, a laundry maid who had polished the rail twice over for fear of smudges. She stood straight. She felt the locket at her throat like a weight that had changed shape in the night. There is a difference between having a secret and having one taken from you. The absence of the petal made a space that the hall's noise could not fill. Lady Beatrice drifted in, as if she had been poured, not walked, into the room. She wore a pale gown, and a look thin as a blade. She did not look at Emma. She did not need to. Curiosity from the rows behind turned like sunflowers following heat. Emma kept her gaze on the Queen's throat, where a pearl rested like a moon that had made its peace with gravity. Mr. Ellis began with the dryness of wheat. The purpose of this assembly is to clarify events following His Royal Highness's awakening, to reaffirm the order of this house, and to prevent the spread of unhelpful tales. Miss Emma Linwood is called to speak to the matter of an unauthorized substance administered to the Prince. Emma stepped forward. There is a moment before one speaks when silence has flavor. Hers tasted of iron and rosemary. She placed her copybook on the table provided and rested her fingers lightly on its cover. "Your Majesty," she said, and the hall held the words carefully so they would not drop and shatter. "I gave a single drop of a tonic known in my grandmother's house for reviving faint breath. It contains angelica, feverfew, honey, and patience. It is not a syrup, it is not a narcotic. I have brought my measures and receipts and a ledger kept by the late princess that names the same ingredients for calling the body back from the brink." Dr. Hawthorne's mouth tilted. "The laboratory does not accept folk chants as proof, Miss Linwood. Your grandmother's kitchen is not a college. Hope is not a solvent." He gestured, and a clerk stepped forward with a small tin box. Within, arranged like accusations, lay files and folded papers. He plucked up one file between finger and thumb. This, taken from the still room, smells of sweetness, designed to disguise its company. Almond. Pear. A preparation known to induce a complacent sleep. It has been prescribed from the Royal Infirmary for a decade. He set it down with the care one gives to a thing one wishes to break without making a mess. Emma felt heat rise at her collar. "That is not mine," she said. "My vial is amber and held honey's color because it has honey's patience in it. The syrup you hold is the cousin the princess warned against. The ledger names it and calls it a leash." She opened her copybook and turned it so the Queen could see the neat columns copied from the late princess's hand. She did not look toward Beatrice. She did not look toward Hawthorne. She kept her eyes on the page, then lifted them to the Queen's face and held there. The Queen glanced down and nodded once for the sake of acknowledgement, not yet belief. Dr. Hawthorne did not look. He had already seen what he wished. Lady Beatrice's voice floated like milk, with a thread of vinegar in it. "Your Majesty, if I may, the plant Miss Linwood keeps in her locket is the very herb banned from the princess's still-room after that unfortunate experiment, is it not?" She smiled, as if sorrow were a shared delicacy. "Bitter seed," they called it. A pretty country name for something quite improper. Emma touched the locket without meaning to, as one touches a scar hidden under cloth. "My locket holds a different sprig, my lady, a companion used for courage and stubborn breath. It is not the bitter seed that makes a sweet sleep. I can show the differences in leaf and stem if the court will be troubled to look rather than listen." Murmurs rose like steam. The footman next to Emma shifted his weight, the sound of leather under strain. The nurse took a half-step forward, then checked herself. Dr. Hawthorne spread his hands as if he were soothing a restive room at a music recital. "The distinctions of botany will not excuse the act, Your Majesty." She trespassed. This cannot be turned into a debate over leaves. Had the air choked, had his heart taken fright, had his breath refused to remember its work, we would be laying blame at a grave. We cannot ground gratitude in gambling. Emma's voice did not rise. It grew smaller and clearer. "I did not gamble. I measured. I watched. I waited until the air had gone thin as a blade. Then I gave a drop and trusted the body to choose. I have also smelled that sweet syrup in the infirmary since the prince woke. Not from my vial, from another phial. One that pretends itself medicine while it is only a rope." Lord Whitcomb, who had made a study of neutrality as a means to power, cleared his throat. "The council will not weigh sympathy. We will weigh stability. The realm cannot allow precedent that household servants may experiment upon a royal person without sanction. Regardless of outcome, it is perilous." He looked at the Queen and found nothing to read there. He looked at Dr. Hawthorne and found affirmation waiting. The Queen lifted her hand and the room's breath tucked itself in. "Miss Linwood, the ledger you offer, how came it into your keeping?" Emma did not look at Mrs. Pierce in the crowd. She would not offer a shield to the flames that wished for a target. I was taught to read by a grandmother who kept no shame in knowledge. I was given charge of the still room here. When the prince woke, I sought wisdom beyond my own hands. The princess's ledger had been sleeping. I woke it. It is a book. It is not a gun. There was a sound not quite like laughter, and not quite unlike it in the hall's back quarter. Lady Beatrice watched Emma with the attentiveness of a cat considering a thrush. Her gaze slipped again to the chain at Emma's throat. "Remind us, Miss Linwood," she said, her voice smooth enough to make a knife jealous. "Did you not arrive with a vial on your person? How interesting that your grandmother's virtues and this house's old prohibitions meet inside your pocket. Some would call that fate. Some would call it design." Emma steadied her breath. The petty fear of a stolen petal and the large fear of public naming tried to fight in her chest. She stood very still until one of them sat down. Then she said, "I did arrive with a vial. I made it in winter when there was time and sorrow, and not enough use for either. It is not forbidden. I will sip it now if you like, my lady, though it will do nothing in my throat but remind me of bees." The nurse took that as permission of a sort, and stepped to the edge of the inner ring. "The prince woke after the drop," she said in a voice meant for bandages, not debates. He drew breath and looked at the window as if he had never seen one. "He has done better each day since. We have weaned him from barley water to broth, from the bed's edge to the threshold. When he smells certain cups now, he turns his face." "What cups?" Dr. Hawthorne asked, quick as a shunt. The nurse swallowed. "The ones that smell too sweet," she said. "Eyes on the Queen, not on the doctor. The ones like pear tarts that should not be in a sick room." Dr. Hawthorne's jaw flexed, and the muscle jumped once like a fish. "Your Majesty, the nurse is tired. The senses deceive with lack of sleep. I require order, not innuendo." The Queen did not look at him. She looked down the hall as if trying to find a thought she had mislaid 10 years ago. Then she said, "Bring my son." There is a particular sound a room makes when it understands it is about to be asked for a different sort of attention. Benches rubbed across stone. People rose and sat and rose again. The footman entered with Arthur between them. He walked without hurry, every step a lesson. He had a man's body and a newborn's care. The light from the high windows made his hair look darker, and his skin paler. He was not dressed in ceremony, only in clean linen and a coat that had been taken in by inches, and then by patience. He did not seem afraid of the room. He seemed to be reading it. He looked at the Queen first. It was instinct. He looked at Emma next. That was not. The hall is a hard place to put tenderness, but sometimes it settles anyway. Emma's hands wanted to reach without moving. She put her fingers flat against her skirt and kept them there. The nurse guided him to a chair set slightly below the dais. He lowered himself with care and something like pride. Dr. Hawthorne stepped to the fore, a small glass in hand. "Your Majesty, a draught for calm. Excitement taxes the heart. The prince must not be overstimulated." Emma's stomach turned. The nurse's eyes flicked to the glass and flinched, so small a flinch it could have been a shadow. The scent did not reach Emma. It reached the prince. He drew his head back a fraction, a surprised animal's motion. The Queen's gaze went to her son's face, then to the glass. She hesitated. People who carry whole nations hesitate less than anyone. When they do, the world moves. Emma found her voice and stepped forward into a silence that feared to be broken. "Your Majesty, may the still room brew a tea of lemon balm instead? A familiar thing. The draught can wait. Let us see whether the room is too much for him before we silence what he feels." Dr. Hawthorne did not look at Emma when he answered. He spoke to the Queen. "Disorder will kill him by degrees," he said. "So will certain orders," the nurse said very low, and the sound barely reached the dais. The Queen lifted a finger. "We will have the balm. Then, if necessary, the draught." "Doctor." "Hawthorne, you may stand ready. Miss Linwood, fetch it." The room let out a collective breath that made a sound like cloth shaken once. Emma moved. She handed the task to the undermaid at the still-room door with a whisper, and came back, not wanting to be absent when truth chose what corner to enter by. Arthur looked at the high windows. He looked at the banner with the lion. He looked at the place where the Queen's hand rested at the edge of the chair. He looked at Emma, and the corner of his mouth moved again. She wanted to say the word. She waited. The tea came in a plain cup. No lace, no gold. The nurse held it. Emma held the saucer. It was ridiculous, the number of hands this small thing required. They were careful for him. That is what mattered. He sipped. His shoulders eased. The room eased with them. Dr. Hawthorne, deprived of his moment, did not flush. He set the glass aside on the table with the rejected tools and fixed his gaze on Emma, as on a misaligned hinge. Lady Beatrice seized the space like a dancer, recognizing a pause in the music. "Your Majesty, may I add a note for the record?" she said, soft as cake. "It is whispered below stairs that Miss Linwood keeps more than sentiment in that chain, that in her locket she preserves the very plant we forbid. I say nothing of harm. I only observe that old scandals rot slowly." She raised her brows a fraction in the direction of Lord Whitcomb, who was very good at understanding what was not said. The Queen's eyes slid to the locket. Emma's skin went cold where the chain lay. She did not reach for it. She lifted it in her mind and placed it on a clean table and described it. "It is a sprig of a stubborn herb, Your Majesty. It smells of iron and stone. It is bitter when chewed and pleasant when you are glad of it. My grandmother called it the friend that argues with death when death tries to leave a room too early. It is not the seed that makes a sweet sleep. I have smelled that syrup of late. It is not my doing." The space between the Queen's brows deepened by half the thickness of a thread. Dr. Hawthorne said, "We are teaching treason to pick locks with sentiment. The prince must not be an excuse for the triumph of ignorance." Emma opened her copybook to the warning again and slid it forward on the table. The nurse added her small voice. "His Highness turned his face from the sweet glass, Your Majesty." He did not turn from the tea. The Queen put her hand flat on the arm of her chair, as if steadying the room itself. "Enough. We are done with sorcery and sentiment. We will have evidence and the thing before our eyes. My son is awake. He will speak for himself when he can. Until then I will read the pages and hear the tongues, and decide what shape our rules must take to keep breath and dignity in the same house." Dr. Hawthorne half bowed. "As Your Majesty wishes." The moment should have loosened. It did not. The prince set the empty cup on the saucer. He straightened a little, as if to test the space from chair to floor. His knees trembled. The nurse reached, then held back, remembering the way men like to pretend they are alone when they stand. Arthur put one hand to the arm of the chair, the other to the edge of the table. He took a breath. The hall leaned forward like wheat before a gust. He pushed up and found himself on his feet, which mattered, and then the air grew thin, which mattered more. Emma saw the color slip from his mouth. She saw the small stutter in his right knee. She moved without meaning to, hand half raised, then stopped, because too many hands can be the same as none at all. He swayed. The nurse whispered, "Here." The footman stepped. Dr. Hawthorne stepped faster. The prince's eyes found Emma and tried to focus. He opened his mouth as if to set down a word as ballast. No sound came. His lids fluttered. The world turned grey for him, and then black. He collapsed. Hawthorne cried, "He is relapsing. Clear the hall." Chaos moved like a tide. The footman caught the prince before his head found the stone. The nurse's hands were steady, the steadiness that comes after years of shaking. The Queen did not rise. She held still, and the hall took its cue from her and did not become a stampede. Dr. Hawthorne was already at the table, already uncorking the small glass. Its sweetness lifted like a perfumed fan. Almond, pear. A kitchen's comfort dragged into a sick room where it did not belong. "Your Majesty," he said, and the glass was at the prince's lips before anyone could vote on the notion. "Only a sip. Calm will handle what panic ruins." Emma's stomach turned. The scent was wrong. It was wrong in the same way a smile could be wrong. She stepped forward, and the guard's arm came up without force, without malice, the body's version of protocol. The nurse found her voice and made it small so it could slide under the guard's arm. "Not that one, doctor, please. Lemon balm first. He will take lemon balm." Hawthorne did not hear or pretended not to. The glass touched Arthur's mouth. The prince swallowed because the throat will do what it is told when the head cannot argue. Emma spoke and the house heard her, though she did not lift her voice. "Your Majesty, the sweetness is the leash the princess named. The ledger warns of it. The syrup makes a peace that is not peace." Lord Whitcomb snapped his gaze to her, all patience gone brittle. "Silence, girl. The hall is no place for your country fancies." The Queen's eyes did not leave her son's face. She saw the swallow. She saw the way his eyelids fluttered, slower, heavier, as if sand had been poured on the hinge. She lifted her hand. "No more of that," she said. "Lemon balm." And air. Hawthorne's mouth thinned. He drew the glass back an inch, not in obedience, but because the moment had already had its way with him. He nodded to the nurse as if he had ordered it. The first tea had done its work already. Arthur's knees steadied enough to let him sit again. He breathed. He did not speak. He let the room finish its panic without him. The Queen stood only when her son's breath had found a slow lane again. Her hand brushed his hair back, a tender economy of movement. Then she faced the hall. "We will close this session. Dr. Hawthorne, you will attend me. Lord Whitcomb, convene the council for this afternoon. Miss Linwood, return to the lower floor. You will be called when we require you. There will be no further theatrics." The word struck Emma like a misaimed slap. She did not argue. She bowed her head and held it there until the room's eyes slid elsewhere. When she lifted it, Arthur was looking at her as if from a long way off. It was not plea, it was not gratitude. It was notice. She left by the side passage, away from the current that carried important men toward important doors. The nurse peeled off to the infirmary with the footman and the prince. Mrs. Pierce found Emma's sleeve and squeezed once, brief and hard. "Breathe and move," she said. "Do not stall where rumor can collect around your ankles." They took the servants' stairs 2 steps at a time. The narrow walls made a different kind of pressure, the kind that keeps thoughts from echoing loud enough to frighten themselves. At the still-room door, Mrs. Pierce took out the key they shared. The key turned, and the lock felt wrong. It gave the way a tooth gives when it has been tampered with. Mrs. Pierce's eyes sharpened. She turned the latch and they stepped into a room that looked tidy at a glance and unfriendly on the second. The shelf where syrup sat had a new neatness, the kind children use when they have broken something and set it back together wrong. Emma went to the jars, to the files, to the places where she had learned to let her hands find what her eyes had not yet named. Her fingers came away sticky from a ring of dried sweetness under a stopper. She uncorked a file and smelled. The sweetness smiled at her with too many teeth. Mrs. Pierce knelt by the lower cupboard. The latch bore a fresh scratch, just enough to offend a person who notices such things. The ledger's hiding place under the flour bin was undisturbed, but the bin's muslin lay the wrong way, its fold facing the wall instead of the room. Emma's heart thudded twice too hard, and then remembered itself. She pulled the ledger free and turned with the care one uses carrying a child downstairs. She laid it on the table and flipped to the marked page with the warning. The torn edge was still torn. The ink still ended with a name that had had its courage taken with a knife. "B," she whispered. Mrs. Pierce's face did not change, but she took a breath that went down farther than most breaths do. The princess was too careful to be sloppy with names. That torn piece was taken for a reason. Emma closed the book and set it aside as if it too had nerves. She moved along the bench where she and Mrs. Pierce measured and noted. A slip of paper sat just under the edge of the mortar, as if the stone had been lifted and set down on it without noticing. She eased it free. The hand was precise and small, like a man who trims his own nails at a desk. Doses written in neat lines. The word syrup appeared. The measures increased and decreased as if someone adjusted them the way a ship's captain trims sail. The signature was not a name. It was an initial. P.H. Emma felt cold at the base of her skull, the place where fear puts its hand when it wants to turn ahead. She did not say the name aloud. Saying would not make it truer. Footsteps ran in the corridor outside the still-room. Not the ordinary hurry of kitchens, the tight rhythm of duties that wear boots. Mrs. Pierce looked up like a hound that has decided the rustle is not a rabbit after all. "Take this," she said, and slid the slip of notes into the seam of Emma's copybook. "Do not tuck it in the ledger. Do not make our enemies' work tidy. Keep your own notes on your person. Hide nothing under flour again." Emma obeyed. She tucked the copybook under her apron, the string biting a little too low into her waist. She set the ledger back under the bin and turned the muslin the right way. The footsteps reached the door. It opened without a knock. Lord Whitcomb filled the frame as men who make a habit of occluding light do. 2 guards, formal but not cruel, flanked him. "Miss Linwood," he said, "the council will hear your explanation this afternoon. Until then, given the volatility of the household and the proliferation of unsanctioned substances, I find it prudent to have you confined." He held up a hand before Mrs. Pierce's mouth could do the sensible, dangerous thing it wanted. "This is not punishment. This is precaution. The optics require it." "Optics is a word for mirrors," Mrs. Pierce said, weary and unafraid. "Mirrors often tell the truth to those who avoid windows." Whitcomb's mouth gave a movement that could not fairly be called a smile. "Be that as it may, Mrs. Pierce, rules are what we have when truth goes missing under flour." He gestured. The guards stepped in, the soft clink of their buckles the only apology offered. Emma stared at his face and listened for the piece of humanity that might move if one pressed the right spot. She heard none. She looked at Mrs. Pierce, and the old woman's eyes told her to keep her chin. So she did. "If I am to be confined," Emma said, "I would like to fetch my Bible and my shawl. And a pencil." "A pencil," Whitcomb said, amused. "To write your witch receipts? To write my measures so I do not forget them while you decide what names to call them," she said, and expected the blow that did not come. He flicked his fingers in permission. 2 minutes. "Then the guards will escort you." They did not walk her up toward heaven. They walked her down, past the bins of potatoes, past the barrels of ale, past the door that led to the well, past the place where rats are invited to leave their arguments at the trap. The air cooled and thickened. The house's heart beats loudest below where no one can accuse it of making a fuss. The room they gave her was not a prison cell, not exactly. It was a storage chamber emptied of its former purpose, swept with a gesture aimed at appearances. A stool, a narrow cot, a small window high up with glass like misremembered water. The door had a bolt. The bolt had a habit. Emma set her shawl on the cot, with the dignity one gives to a feast, laid on a cracked plate. She set her Bible next to it. She kept her copybook under her apron, and did not ask to put it anywhere else. Lord Whitcomb stood in the doorway and gave her a look that tried to be kind and landed only near it. "If you are as innocent as you say, Miss Linwood, you will have your hour. If you are not, you will have your—" He let the word trail because finishing it would have made him complicit in ugliness, and he was careful to keep his hands clean of anything that did not polish. Mrs. Pierce had followed to the corridor's mouth and was held there by a guard who did not relish his work and did not shirk it either. "Child," she said, her voice a low bell, "I will carry your book in my mouth if I must. Keep your wits like a knife in your pocket. Do not show it unless you intend to use it." Emma nodded. She sat on the cot and placed her hands on her knees so they would not do something foolish like reach for a bolt and test it. Whitcomb nodded once, as if a ledger had been closed neatly. "Guards," he said. They stepped back. The door came to with a dull sound that does not imagine itself cruel. In the quiet that followed, Emma heard a small new noise. She thought at first it was a mouse, then she realized it was her own breath, learning the shape of a confined room. A moment later, something else scratched at the edge of hearing. She tipped her head. Fabric against wood in a narrow passage. A ribbon snagged where the stone meets the frame. She stood and looked up at the high window. On the sill, caught and held by a splinter, a shred of silk had lodged, pale as a petal. She reached up, stretched her fingers, and it fell into her palm. The color was the exact shade Lady Beatrice favored when she wished to appear innocent and only achieved attention. Emma closed her hand around it and felt the shape of a plan form in the empty space where fear had been. There was movement in the hall again, heavier this time, a different rhythm. A man who carries keys knows his own importance and lets the sound of it announce him. Emma slid the ribbon under the mattress. She put her back to the wall and watched the door. By order of the council, Lord Whitcomb said from the far side, "Emma Linwood, you will be confined until judgment." The door swung shut. The bolt fell. The key turned. Night dragged its cool hem along the stones. Emma learned the pattern of the guard's steps by listening to the floorboards breathe. The small window gathered a square of moon and laid it high on the wall where she could not reach it. She held the pencil Mrs. Pierce had smuggled to her and wrote the day into her copybook, the way sailors make maps of coasts they cannot yet land upon. Footsteps shifted. 2 voices, not one. The metal murmur of keys. The bolt moved with the softness of a man who does not want to hear himself betray his duty. She stood, heartbeat steady because she told it to be. The door opened a crack, then wider, and a figure filled it, taller than the guard, thinner than fear. Arthur stepped inside the room with the caution of a man entering his own life for the second time. Behind him, a footman, the younger one with the good boots and the bad habit of chewing his lip, kept watch on the corridor. His face held a decision he had made, and would only question when he was old and safe enough to enjoy regret. "Your Highness," Emma breathed, and the guard's breath caught in the hall, as if the name had pushed into him and asked for room. Arthur lifted a hand, not a command, a plea for quiet. He wore a plain coat and no ornament but a ring on a ribbon around his neck. Without the ornament of rank, he was almost ordinary, and that made him more himself than any robe could. "Tom will stand watch," he said, each word picked and placed on his tongue. He tilted his head toward the footman, who flushed at being named by a prince, and squared his shoulders like a boy about to shoulder a man's plough. "How did you—" Emma began, then closed her lips because questions spend time that could buy freedom. Arthur touched the ribbon at his neck and showed her the ring, a signet that carried an old lion's patient face. He looked at Tom, then at Emma. "Trade," he said, and managed the smallest curve of a smile. "Tomorrow I will ask my mother for it back. Tonight I am a thief." Emma's laugh was more breath than sound. "You should not be here." "I should be everywhere they say I must," he answered, and the words came smoother when he used them to push against something. "But I am here." He looked at her, as if cataloguing a face for a memory he meant to keep clean. He took one step closer, and then another. The room was small, and the distance shortened quicker than dignity likes. He did not crowd her. He stood in the place where a hand could have found a hand if both wished. "I wanted—" he began, then stopped because wanting is a tender verb in a house that does not respect desire. She saved him. "To know if I was safe," she said. "To see if the room is kind. To ask if I regret." He held her eyes. "Do you?" "No." The word left like a bird set free without looking back. "Do you?" He looked down at her hands, and then up again. "I remember a cup. I remember a word felt before it was spoken. Light. Candle. I remember waking to a room that knew my name even when I did not. I remember your face when they were saying arrest and bewitch, and all the words that try to drown a person in public. I do not know many things. I know this. I would rather be awake in trouble than asleep in peace that is not mine." Her throat tightened. He had not promised love. He had promised a kind of companionship harder to keep, truth in a room built of performance. He reached one hand toward the chain at her throat and stopped a breath away, asking with the halted gesture. She moved a fraction, enough, and he touched the locket lightly, as if it were an egg with a live thing inside it. His fingers found the place where the petal was missing. He looked at her and then at the locket again, not with shock but with a steady curiosity that made questions decent. "Someone took what they did not understand," she said. "A petal is small, but theft is theft. I do not think they wished to honor my grandmother when they made a keepsake into a tool." He nodded once. "Beatrice," he said, trying the name to see if it fit a hole in his memory. "B. The ledger." He frowned, the same small frown that came when a word hid behind a hedge in his mind. He looked past her toward the wall, as if sound could be coaxed into form by patience alone. "The doctor, a glass, almond, pear." He grimaced. "The taste has its own memory. It does not need mine." Tom coughed softly and shifted in the doorway, a reminder that time owns the room even when other people think they do. "Your Highness," he whispered, voice respectful and practical. "If they come on rounds." Arthur inclined his head in acknowledgement, then looked back at Emma and did something that looked like a decision straightening its coat. "I am not clever in words yet," he said, "but I know where to put a line. I prefer your truth to their protocol. It is not comfortable. Comfortable is what they fed me for 10 years. I am done with comfortable." She could have told him that love had many faces, and this was one of them, square-jawed and unafraid of mess. She did not speak the word. She let the room learn it without hearing it. "We must be careful," she said instead, "because care is love's older sister. The syrup is here, in this house. Someone made sure of it. We smelled it. The ledger warns of it. And there is a page torn where a name begins and refuses to finish." "Beatrice," he said again, more certain now. She came often. I remember a laugh that did not like to be alone. I remember a blue ribbon on a page once. He put his palm to his temple and made the smallest sound of frustration at his own mind's unwillingness to move faster. "It is enough," she said. "We do not need the whole road in our pocket to begin walking, and we have something else. Mrs. Pierce is looking for what is missing." As if conjured by the sentence, there was a hush and then a whisper of fabric at the far end of the corridor. Tom whistled once, the note a bird's, not a boy's, and the steps hushed themselves more. Mrs. Pierce slipped through the door like a thought that had kept itself tidy enough to pass unnoticed. "You thieving child," she said to Arthur without bowing, which was its own kind of love. "You will give your mother back her ring, and then you will bring her something worth more than rings." She produced from within her apron a folded square of rough paper made thinner by time and handling. She held it as if it were a fragile bone. Emma's breath caught. The missing leaf. Mrs. Pierce nodded once, stitched into the lining of a certain lady's reticule. Poor stitchery, if you ask me. Pride is a lazy seamstress. I unpicked it while she was telling a story she liked too much to look down. I stitched the hole with better thread than her maid has seen in years. Let us hope she never learns how to look. She unfolded the paper on Emma's cot, away from the damp of the wall and the draught from the door. The ink had held. The hand was the princess's, as sure as a path in a garden she had walked each morning. "Beware the sweet sleep from bitter seed," it read again, and below it more. "The syrup binds a body to stillness, while the mind moves like a moth behind glass. Do not mistake a quiet house for a peaceful one." A line below in later ink, tighter with haste. The princess had added names. PH assists as if in duty. BV supplies from the private stores with complaints that perfume her speeches. I do not trust their alliance. The letters sat on the page like people in a row, small but undeniable. P.H. Beatrice Vale. Arthur steadied his hand on the edge of the cot. He took the names as if they were weights meant for his palms and not burdens meant for his back. He closed his eyes once. When he opened them, they were clear. "We will show this," he said, "in the hall, not whispered in corners, not sent by notes that can be misunderstood on purpose. We will put it in my mother's hand, where all can see and watch who flinches and who does not." Emma nodded and reached into her apron for her copybook. She slid the slip with PH's measured doses beside the princess's hand. The difference in the scripts made a harmony that told a single story, she added from her memory. The scents, the hours, the moment the glass touched the prince's mouth and the eyelids grew heavy as night falling where it does not belong. "We must have the files," Mrs. Pierce said. "They will claim the notes are inventions, and the hand is forged. But a bottle is a bottle even when a liar holds it. Bring one that smiles too sweetly, and even a counsel will taste the wrongness." Emma shook her head. The still room was stirred today. "They have tidied their chaos and left our accusation with nothing to point to. We need a fresh cup, one that has not yet learned shame. Dr. Hawthorne keeps a drawer near his desk. He calls it order, and it looks like proof." Arthur's face moved through thought to decision. "Tom, Your Highness, can you find your way to the physician's passage and not be seen because you are meant to be seen? Can you carry a tray and be mistaken for part of the furniture? Can you take a glass that will not be missed for an hour and bring it to a door with a bolt where a girl is making a plan to put a kingdom back on its feet?" Tom's grin betrayed him as young and then rebuilt itself into resolve. "Yes, sir." "Do not be a hero, Mrs. Pierce said, "because heroes feed rumors and funerals and then all our work is wasted on speeches. Be a boy with a tray who makes a small error and corrects it before he is noticed. That is harder. Do that." Tom nodded and left, the door's shadow barely changing. The corridor listened and heard only its own old bones. Arthur sat on the stool, which had never imagined it would bear a prince, and did so without complaint. He looked at Emma again, his gaze doing the work of a touch he did not presume. The room felt like a ship's cabin in a calm sea, where waves still made the wood sing. "When this ends," he said quietly, and the words were careful because when is a verb that lies to vulnerable people, will you... He stopped because promises spoken in walls are bold and sometimes foolish. He swallowed and tried again. Simpler, truer. "Will you walk beside me? Not behind, not hidden, not in rooms borrowed from kindness. Freely." Her answer was a yes the size of her chest. It might knock down her ribs if she was not careful. She let it out slowly so it would not frighten them. Yes, freely, or not at all. He exhaled, and the sound carried relief and wonder in equal measure. He reached for her hand and did not take it. She reached and laid her fingers on his, and that was both more and less than taking. Tom returned with the speed of someone who respects haste and knows it earns suspicion. He carried a folded cloth with something small wrapped inside. He shut the door behind him with his heel and held out the bundle to Mrs. Pierce like an offering. "The doctor's drawer was busy," he whispered. "I waited until the maid turned her head to answer a question she did not want to answer, and then I made a mistake and took the wrong glass and then corrected myself and set back a right glass and brought away a different wrong." He blinked. "I am not sure if that makes sense." "It does, Mrs." Pierce said, unwrapping the cloth. A phial lay there, its liquid innocent as sunlight and its scent dissembling. Emma did not need to lift it to her nose. The sweetness reached as audacious as a kiss. They wrapped it again and tucked it into Emma's apron pocket. It felt like a stone smuggled out of a river. Arthur rose, the room too small for what they meant to take into it. He looked at the stolen page and the copybook and the bundled proof, and then at Emma, as if to take a last look at something in case walls could not be trusted to hand back what they held. "We must go," he said. "Before someone who imagines himself, the house hears the house breathing differently." Mrs. Pierce opened the door. Tom stepped out and nodded once, the corridor clear. Arthur touched the ring at his neck, and then did what courage does when it has found its matching piece in another person. He set his jaw without hardness. They went the long way, because the long way is sometimes the safe way. Past barrels, past hooks, past the door where the sea sent its voice in skinny draughts. The bolt fell gently behind them when they left the storage room, as if in apology for holding her. At the chapel, where sound bends itself to tenderness, they paused. Arthur stood under the carved arch and breathed the air that had gathered every prayer said in that room for a decade. He put his hand on the rail as if greeting an old comrade. He looked at Emma. "Light," he said. "Candle," she answered, and the word felt like a vow spoken without rings. The bell in the courtyard struck the hour, and then another sound layered over it, a herald's cry cutting the cool. "Council is assembled. Bring in the accused." The council chamber had been aired and swept, as if order could be polished into the grain of wood. Benches lined the walls. At the far end, under a window that gathered the sky and laid it like a blessing on the table, the Dowager Queen sat with the gravity of one who had been forced to choose sense over softness too often. Dr. Hawthorne stood at her right, Lord Whitcomb at her left. Clerks rustled. The sound had the appetite of crows. Emma entered between two guards who did not so much hold her as escort her shadow. Mrs. Pierce walked just behind, her cap plain and her spine unbothered by the importance of men. Tom kept to the edge, where boys learn what power looks like on the days it pretends to be law. The nurse arrived with a little gasp, not from running but from the habit of breathing for two. She took a place near the rear and folded her hands as if to keep them from reaching to steady the whole room. Then the doors opened again and the air changed. Arthur crossed the threshold without a hand on his arm. He walked with the caution of a man who knows his body will ask for respect, and the quiet pride of one who has decided he will not ask permission to stand. A murmur moved through the chamber like wind in barley. The Queen's eyes filled and did not spill. "Your Highness," Lord Whitcomb began, rising a fraction as if the act might be contagious, "the Council is grateful for your presence. We sit to determine whether Miss Linwood's conduct constitutes a danger to the realm's order." "We sit," the Queen said, "because truth is a guest that will not be made to wait on the stair. Proceed." Mr. Ellis read the charges as if they were weights he did not enjoy lifting. Dr. Hawthorne stood with his hands at ease, and his disdain folded small enough to fit in a pocket. Lady Beatrice entered late, blue ribbon at her wrist, an apology shaped like a smile ready should anyone notice she had kept them waiting. Emma stepped forward when called. She set her copybook on the table. She did not reach for her locket. She did not touch the place where the petal should have been. "Your Majesty," she said, "I gave a single drop of a tonic. I bring receipts and measures. I bring, with your leave, a page from the late Princess's ledger that names a different thing, a syrup that binds a body to stillness. I bring also a phial that smells too sweet to be honest." Mrs. Pierce unfolded the rescued leaf with the care of a woman smoothing a christening gown. The clerk bent to read and looked up too quickly, the speed of surprise. The Queen extended her hand. Paper looked small in a queen's fingers, and heavy at once. She read the neat lines, the warning, the later addition. PH assists as if in duty. BV supplies from the private stores with complaints that perfume her speeches. I do not trust their alliance. Dr. Hawthorne did not flinch. That is not the princess's hand, he said mildly. It could be any lady's diary. People embellish their tragedies to make them more interesting. Emma slid the slim slip of doses beside the page. The hand there was Hawthorne's, precise as his cuffs. The clerk held the two up, and the light found their differences. The differences did not make them strangers. Tom stepped forward and bowed his respect into the floorboards. I took a file from the physician's drawer. I am guilty of stupidity, not malice. It smells of almond and pear. We found it wrapped in Miss Linwood's pocket because we brought it to bring here. He flushed at the pronoun and stood in it anyway. We means those who wish for the prince to stay awake. Bring it, the Queen said. The clerk uncorked. The scent walked into the room uninvited. Even those who did not know herbs knew tarts. Even those who did not know tarts knew pretense. Hawthorne's lips compressed. Your Majesty, this is theatrics. Smell is not science. A council is not a laboratory. We decide governance, not recipes. The nurse lifted her chin and found a voice meant to wrap around wounds. He turned from that smell today. He took lemon balm. He sat up. He did not drift. I have tended His Highness's mouth and lids and breath for 10 years. Today they were his. Not mine, not yours. Lady Beatrice tilted her head. The little movement said she had counted the exits and found none she liked. She stepped neatly into the narrowest doorway, the one that leads to performance. We are all grateful that His Highness's eyes have opened, she said, luminous with virtue. But we cannot let gutter-snipe bravado turn the court into a hedge witch's hut. If receipts are to be weighed, let us weigh also the receipts for ambition. She allowed the room to admire the shape of her mouth for a heartbeat. People have been dismissed from court for far less than touching the heir's lips with unknown things in the dark. Emma met her gaze. Unknown to you does not make them wicked, nor known to you make them good. The Queen raised a hand. Lady Beatrice, your ribbon is torn. Beatrice glanced down, the smallest crack. A sliver of blue hung where a neat edge should have been. Mrs. Pierce did not smile. Your reticule is mended better than last week, my lady, she said. It used to gape like a story with a hole. Curiosity pricks. I pricked back. The princess's leaf was tucked there. Poorly. I unpicked it. I returned your lining better than I found it. The paper I kept because it belonged to someone who no longer has pockets. A sound moved through the room that meant interest rising like heat. Beatrice regained her posture. I carry notes like any woman at court who wishes to remember little things. I do not read dead women's worries as law. The doctor and I are not conspirators. We are... Her eyes flicked to Hawthorne and found no rescue there. He had not prepared a duet. He had written a solo. PH, Emma said softly to the Queen. And BV, the princess, writes what she sees. She warns. You may scold her for the impertinence of knowing. But she knew. Doctor, Hawthorne's face changed as little as a rock face in winter. The change was there anyway. It was in the eyes. He stepped forward to the table, picked up the file Tom had delivered, and set it down again with a care that made it a confession. For 10 years, he said, I have stood between this house and despair. A physician is allowed tools that are not pretty. Sleep is a mercy when the alternative is panic and spasms and the body's rebellion. I kept a kingdom stable while courtiers plotted futures that did not include a breathing heir. I may have erred. I did not betray. Lord Whitcomb tasted the air and found a scent he did not like. Doctor, he began, tone smoothing itself, surely we can find language less compromising. Beatrice moved that small, sharp movement beautiful women make when they fear a wave. The doctor asked for stores that were kept. I allowed them because I am not a coward when it comes to mercy. I did not poison anyone. I entertained guests. I read to the Queen. I soothed a prince whose mother could not bear to hear him not respond. She made a better story than truth and tried to climb into it. The Queen rose. It was not a dramatic movement. The drama happened anyway because the room stood with her. 10 years of candles, she said. 10 years of a nation that did not know whether to mourn and dared not hope. 10 years in which I let a man speak calmly to me about the virtues of order because I feared the spectacle of chaos. 10 years of visits from a lady who loved the edge of a secret. If you had said to me on the first night, "Madam, your son will sleep 10 years under a sweet leash," I would have set this hall on fire and warmed my hands at the ruin. Instead, Mercy came in clever sentences and small glasses and wore duty's coat. She lifted the princess's page and read the names again. Dr. Percival Hawthorne, Lady Beatrice Vale. Her voice did not make them villains, it made them facts. Hawthorne bowed a degree. Your Majesty, I request leave to resign and to present my methods to a medical board rather than to a council of householders inflamed by a maid's theatrics. Beatrice's head snapped toward him, a bird struck by a stone it did not see. Resign? You will not leave me to— Silence, the Queen said, and her voice was a hand over a pool. Beatrice Vale, you will leave this house before dusk and not return to it unless summoned. Your servants will return your belongings in an inventory that lists no paper not written in your hand. You will keep your pensions. You will not keep your place. Beatrice's lips parted. She tried to find a weapon in the room and found only air. For an instant, naked hurt moved in her face, small and ordinary. Then she gathered herself, bowed with a grace that would be described as admirable by those who like to watch falls, and stepped back until she was no longer the brightest thing in the chamber. Dr. Hawthorne, the Queen continued, you are relieved of office. You will be escorted to your rooms and then to a carriage. A magistrate will receive the files, the drawer, your notes, and your resignation. You will have your hearing. It will not be on your terms. Hawthorne inclined his head, as if the news were a course in a meal he had not ordered but intended to eat politely. Your Majesty. Lord Whitcomb cleared his throat with the sound of a man attempting to step backward without appearing to move. Your Majesty, the Council acted in good faith when it safeguarded the household. The Council, the Queen said, looked to a physician for science and to a lady for charm and forgot to look to a mother for consent. You will write the orders that correct this. Then you will write your own letter of retirement, citing an infirmity we will not specify. You have done your utmost. Your utmost is no longer enough. Whitcomb's face did not manage the trick of gratitude. It found obedience instead. As your Majesty wishes. The Queen turned to Emma. The room's attention turned with her and fell quiet like snow. Miss Linwood, you broke a rule and saved a life. I will not teach my household that to obey is safer than to be brave. You will not be punished. You will be thanked. You are restored to your duties at this house's heart. If you will have it, you will keep the still room until we find a physician who can sit in the same chair as our former doctor without asking us to sleep through our lives. Emma's breath left and returned as if it had been taught a new way to behave. Thank you, Your Majesty, she said, and it was not a formula. It was what a person says when a weight is lifted that has bent their back and their vision. The Queen's gaze softened by a thread. Bring me your ledger when you have copied the princess's notes cleanly and marked your own errors and successes without shame. We are done hiding our knowledge under flour. The clerk gathered the papers. Guards moved as quietly as their belts would permit. Dr. Hawthorne bowed to the Queen, to the Prince, to the heir, and left with his spine as straight as he had kept his shelves. Lady Beatrice walked out as if the floor might bite, but had been told not to in front of guests. Lord Whitcomb wrote as instructed. The chamber exhaled a collective breath that had forgotten it was holding itself. Emma did not move until the nurse's hand found her elbow and squeezed once. Mrs. Pierce did not dab her eyes. She would do that later in a broom closet and then deny it with vigor. Arthur stood. He did it with no drama, and was as handsome doing so as he would ever be in any uniform. He crossed the room. No one stopped him because he moved like a person who had decided that interruptions cost more than courtesy. He came to Emma and did not take her hands yet. He stood a breath away and let the room see a man who is not ashamed of gratitude. You gave me back my waking, he said, and his voice was not a prince's voice then. It was a man's. Thank you. The Queen watched them with an expression that could have been called tired joy if one were writing to an old friend. She did not interrupt. She did not hasten what did not need haste. She lifted her hand to the clerk. We are done. Go back to your tasks. Let the house learn a new rhythm. They left, all of them, even the curiosity that had tried its best to keep sitting. The chamber emptied as a field empties of wind. The light moved a finger's width across the table. Emma found herself walking beside Arthur on the cliff path an hour later, the sea's breath making conversation where words were too dear. They did not speak much. They did not need to. Mrs. Pierce had placed a shawl over Emma's shoulders with a flourish that made even practicality feel celebratory. Tom had run ahead and then run back 3 times, a dog disguised as a boy. The nurse sat on a low wall and let her hands rest for once in her lap. The horizon lay like a promise no one could keep alone. Arthur stopped where the wind gathered itself and did not spend it yet. He looked out, then at Emma. "We will hire a physician who respects tea and truth," he said. "We will publish the late princess's pages, and yours beside them, and we will bear the scandal of being sensible. My mother will scold me for walking too far, and I will obey her until I do not, and then I will apologize properly so she forgives me." He smiled slow. "We will not sleep in syrup." Emma laughed, soft, and the laugh surprised her because it felt like a thing she had not used in a while and discovered still fit. "We will make a school from the stillroom," she said, "for girls with steady hands and minds they are not ashamed of. We will teach boys too if they wish to mind patience as much as knives." He nodded, the motion easy now. A gull dropped and caught itself and rose again. The sea lay its grey and silver out like a cloth ready for a meal. He reached for her hand then, not careful, not careless, simply right. She gave it without thinking herself brave for doing so. The world had been loud all morning. Here it grew quiet enough that she could hear the small truth beating in her chest. Behind them, the house fixed its protocol and relearned its prayers. In front of them, the cliff path bent toward a chapel whose door never locked against dawn. They stood a while, 2 figures in plain coats, and let the wind carry away what they did not need to say. Then they turned together and walked back, not to surrender, but to begin. Dawn came like a soft hand on a fevered brow. The little coastal chapel opened its wooden door and let the sea's breath wander in and learn the pews by heart. Wildflowers stood in jars along the aisle as if the hedge itself had decided to attend. No trumpets, no banners, only the patient rhythm of waves and a bell that did not shout, only told the hour it had been given. Mrs. Pierce fussed with nothing at all and wept freely all the same. Tom had polished his boots to a shine that made him taller. The nurse sat in the first pew, a handkerchief clutched but not used yet, mouth already trembling at a happiness she had not dared to imagine for a decade. The Queen wore grey and softness, and the expression of a woman who would allow herself to feel joy on purpose and not apologize. Arthur stood at the front in a plain coat the colour of good earth. In his palm lay a ring he had warmed there without meaning to. He did not look at the door every other breath. He looked at the window where the light entered and made people into kinder shapes. When it touched the floor and moved an inch, he breathed deeper. Patience had learned him, and he had learned it back. Then the door filled with a figure, and every person there understood how a simple thing becomes holy. Emma stepped over the threshold in a gown that had been her mother's, and was now hers because life can be unstitched and sewn back into new shapes. The hem brushed the stone like a whisper. A sprig of rosemary nestled at her wrist, tied with the thinnest ribbon. Her hair was not made into a tower. It was gathered like a promise you intend to keep. She walked as she had always worked, steady, careful, certain of each footfall. When she reached the front, she did not drop her eyes as if before a throne. She lifted them and met the face of the man she had called back to the room where he belonged. He took her hands. The ring waited in his palm and learned her temperature. The locket lay against her collarbone. In it not a petal now, but a sliver of parchment with a single word in his hand, kept where courage once slept. The priest's prayer was brief and not made of flourishes. It was a reminder that vows do not become true because a man in a robe says so. They become true because 2 people wake each day and make them again. He spoke, and the sea kept time, and the gulls skimmed the air as if they had places to be and were pleased with them. Arthur turned to Emma. His voice had shed its hesitation, not all at once, but in a way that made the room believe it would never run again from a word it needed. "I was taught to keep order," he said. "It let the wrong people sleep. You taught me to prefer truth. It keeps the right people awake. I pledge to you my hand and my hours. I pledge you my name, not as a shield, but as a place you may stand beside, not behind. I promise to choose you in rooms filled with law, and in kitchens filled with steam, and in gardens where nothing is behaving. I promise patience. I promise laughter when it tries to hide. I promise work. With you. Not over you. Not around you. With you. Emma could not keep the trembling from her mouth. It did not matter. She let it be what it was and made it part of the vow. I was taught to be useful, she said. It nearly taught me to be small. You made room for my truth on a table that did not expect to be set with it. I pledge to you my steadiness and my stubbornness, which is only courage when it has learned a tune. I pledge the still room of my mind. I pledge my hands and their measures. I promise to speak when silence would keep me clean but make us false. I promise to listen when words try to run faster than sense. I promise work. With you. Not under. Not above. With. He lifted the ring. He slid it onto her finger. It moved there as if the finger had been made knowing a circle would one day rest there. She took another ring from Mrs. Pierce's palm, warmed by tears and the old woman's fierce joy, and set it on his hand, which had held so much and was only just learning not to hold the past too tightly. Arthur turned his head toward the window. He looked at the square of brightness and at the candle by the rail. He smiled, small and real. Light, he said. Candle, she answered, and everyone who understood what could be contained in a single syllable closed their eyes and called it blessing. They kissed, not as a performance, but as the first line of a conversation they planned to continue for as long as breath permitted. The bell marked the moment without fuss. The sea outdid itself at being sea. Inside, Mrs. Pierce sobbed and laughed at once, which is how practical people celebrate when they forget to be practical. The Queen's hands, which had held a nation's grief, came together once, then again, very softly. Tom made a sound he would later deny, and the nurse put her head down and let herself have the luxury of feeling light. They walked out into the salt air as husband and wife, which are not words that make magic by themselves, but here they had become strong by being true. The cliff path waited like a long table set for two, then four, then a crowd. They did not travel far that day. They did not need to. The world had come to them and found them ready. In the weeks that followed, the house changed its habits, not by smashing them, but by teaching them new steps. The physician who came to sit where Hawthorne had sat did not bring syrup when he brought a chart. He brought his caution and asked the still room to lend him its patience. He read the princess's ledger and did not laugh. He read Emma's notes and did not flinch at the lines that named failures without shame. He wrote his own beside them in a hand that did not apologize for being a man who had learned from a woman. They opened the infirmary doors to those who could not pay, and those who could, and taught them the difference between peace and quiet. Emma kept the still room and made it something else too, a school. Girls in plain gowns came with eager, sharp faces and the hands of people who have had to make do and were ready to make more. Boys came timid and then proud when they found that patience was a skill, not a softness. Emma set them to copying measures and recording errors as if errors were as valuable as successes. She told them not to hide truth under flour. She told them to smell their syrups and not be fooled by sweetness. The Queen came sometimes and watched from the doorway, her skirts gathered in one hand. She did not interfere. She did not direct. She stood and learned what it felt like to be a woman in a room where knowledge was not borrowed, but owned. Arthur stood beside Emma often, and not to bless what she did, but to join it. He carried baskets, not as a gesture, but because baskets need carrying. He learned the names of plants he had never been asked to visit. He tolerated rue and delighted in mint. He spoke in counsel from a chair that used to make him careful and now made him brave. He said, "We will weigh our rules against the ribs they press. If a rule keeps breath from a living body, it is a poor rule and must be rewritten." They published the princess's pages with a preface in the Queen's hand that said plainly, "A woman wrote this, a mother, a daughter, a student of ordinary miracles." The kingdom read and argued and then read again. Ministers frowned at the idea of printing a lady's notes. Bishops raised eyebrows at the liberty. Mothers bound the pamphlet in cloth and tucked it beside their Bibles. Apothecaries measured with better habits. Doctors scowled, and then stole phrases, and then stopped scowling. Lady Beatrice wrote from exile, and then stopped writing. Dr. Hawthorne spoke to men in dark coats in rooms that smelled of ink and slow judgment. He did not eat well. He slept perhaps for once, without syrup. Lord Whitcomb learned to fish and told lies to boys by a riverside, lies that did no harm and gave him something like penance. Emma and Arthur returned to the chapel often, not because superstition enjoys being fed, but because gratitude does. They stood in the narrow square of sunlight when it found them and learned the shape of their years. The world kept trying to return to pomp. They kept choosing simple. Their first winter as husband and wife arrived with a frost that drew feathers on the windows. They laid extra blankets where no one had laid them before. The still room smelled of rosemary and wood smoke and ink. The nursery, which had forgotten its purpose too long, remembered a little with the sound of a cradle someone had left for later. They did not hurry it. They did not count on it. They kept loving as work, which is the kind that leaves something built at dusk where there had been only plans at dawn. One morning, on the cliff, with gulls cutting white arcs against a sky too clean for sorrow, Emma pulled the locket free and opened it. Inside, the sliver of parchment lay where the petal had been. Light, it said in his careful hand. She showed him. He smiled and reached to add one more scrap, tucked alongside with the tenderness one uses with a page that means everything. He had written candle in her script, because he had practiced when she was not looking. They walked on. The wind pushed and they leaned into it, laughing because leaning is easier when you are not alone. And this is where the story turns from theirs to yours, because years change shape but courage does not. If you have ever stood in a room where rules tried to name you smaller than you are, remember the girl who risked a drop and the man who chose to wake. If you have ever feared that kindness is not strong enough, remember a still room where patience was a way of telling the truth. If you have wondered whether love should be fireworks, consider two people saying a word they made holy by using it every day. Light. Candle. May you find the moment when fear quiets and your hand steadies. May you choose breath over reputation, truth over applause, work over theatre. And when you stand at your own small rail, with the window bright and the floor ordinary, and your name waiting on someone's tongue, may you answer it with your whole life. Thank you so much for listening to this story all the way to the end. We hope it moved you as much as it moved us while telling it. We'd love to hear your thoughts. Leave us a comment telling us where you're listening from and what you liked the most. Rate this story from 0 to 10. What score would you give it? If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and leave a like as a show of support. That really motivates us to keep creating and sharing more stories full of emotion and life lessons. And before we go, we want to remind you that an exciting and heartwarming story recommendation will appear on the final screen. If you'd like to enjoy it, just click on the video. Thank you once again for being here, and we'll see you in the next story.